So, Creative Assembly. There's a company that's hardly unfamiliar with the state of being in hot waters these days, as not only have they recently released a remarkably poorly received DLC pack that led to major restructurings of their DLC policy, better late than never, although I'm certainly not quite happy yet, and the even more poorly received Total War Pharaoh, which in many ways exemplifies the entire fall from grace of the Total War series, which was once an absolutely revolutionary strategy game series and now has been, well, virtually completely calcified for a good 10 odd years. In fact, calcified is too charitable a word, as Total War has in essence regressed rather than merely stagnated. And you can quite often tell to which degree the ship is tilting by the date of the drama being dragged up surrounding it, and well, here we have Julian McKinley with Total War Rome 2 and Creative Assembly, my statement, 10 years on. Again, if the date marking is any indication, Creative Assembly isn't merely a ship that's listing somewhat at this point, it's probably a submersible by now. Now, this article is... oh boy, oh, by the way, yes, it's that guy, in case you've forgotten. That picture is likely to bring up some memories from the old school Total War crowd, but yeah, the article is long, and any statement made 10 years after the fact is likely to have been deprived of a fair bit of efficiency and relevance, let's be fair here, but basically, his allegation is that the reason why Rome 2 was delivered as an absolute near unplayable mess, in large part due to artificial intelligence problems, was because the AI team, which he was a major representative of, had simply not been given enough time to actually do what they were being asked to do, and that they were given a bunch of new various features and things to implement as the game was merely just a couple of months or even weeks away from release, giving them no opportunity to actually fix any of the problems that would inevitably emerge by all of the new coding and the new features and things placed into the game. And this is, of course, entirely fair. It sounds reasonable and realistic, because here's the thing. I remember around about the time that a lot of people did kind of blame this guy for everything, and as he was the spokesperson for the AI department, and the AI again was one of the biggest issues to the point where on many maps and situations it was simply not functional, it is easy to assume that he was directly responsible. But, of course, if he was, well, surely we'd be swimming in good Total War games by now, right? As he hasn't been at the company for something like 9 odd years. And, we are not, are we? Now, I'd like to thank Fuzzybird, by the way, for sending me this, and these as well, Glassdoor reviews, which seems to indicate that what Mr. Keenly says, or Keeley, is probably correct. Although, here's the thing too, like, Total War Rome 2 was the one with the biggest development time and the biggest budget, and at that point, you do have the question of, okay, management says, I want this thing, this series of things, and programmers go, give us 6 months to take a number, right? And management goes, you have 3 months. Who's in the wrong there? It's a bit of a shared responsibility, really, in my opinion, as of course management does need to, adapt to reality, but it is also the programmer's work to not only get it done, but also make it very, very clearly make it clear that it isn't possible to get it done in a way that, gets home to management and the designers. So, here. Pros of Creative Assembly: low expectations, easy to coast by if you don't really care about your job. Fear of confrontation means you will rarely be called out on your mistakes. I'll leave it up to you to decide how much of these are really pros. This makes a lot of sense, because what we've been seeing in recent Total War games is that they are no longer able to do what they once were. So many of the features that have existed in Total War games since practically the beginning are not implemented as well. Again, Pharaoh was a beautiful example of this, where at the end of the day you had a fairly basic bitch Total War game that felt worse in almost every regard, in terms of balance, in terms of gameplay, in terms of interactive mechanics, in terms of how little was being delivered for a full price, and so on. And we're seeing it in Total War games as well, where mechanics that should have been solidified ages ago simply don't work. The core problems with the engines, unit collision, AI issues to this day. It seems as if Creative Assembly simply are no longer able to recreate what they once did. And judging by stuff like this, that makes a certain degree of sense. Cons. At the moment, CA is suffering a financial and identity crisis due to years of bad decisions from management. Nowadays, many studios update talks about change without anything concrete being proposed, while every few months new layoffs are announced. Interesting. CA used to be an incredible company to work for. However, over the last 6 years, it's been run into the ground by terrible leadership. The recent redundancies have really proven this, as the workforce has been cut, and yet not one member of the senior leadership team has been put at risk. The company has been run into the ground by managers who just don't know what they're doing. None of them have successfully run companies before. In fact, the studio director has already run 1 or 2 game companies into dust prior. The workforce is being reduced from around 700 originally to 280 come June 2024. This is enormous, and by the way, I think it was 800 originally, according to what I saw, down to 240. Now, the game company was bloated to high heavens, clearly, and a lot of that also appears to have been, well, in large parts, incompetence, as there is other reviews talking about how people weren't really doing their jobs here. Turns to absolute shit show when the money runs dry. Incompetent leadership, more directors and middle managers than actual team members, a global inertia you've never bid for, low salaries for the south of the UK, outdated information on the cost of living, and of course, again, if you're an artist, avoid this place. You will not receive constructive feedback, hindering your growth as an artist. There are no senior or principal artists to learn from, all technology, etc., etc. So, at the end of the day, a lot of the things that are being alleged in this hour-long read seem, with the added context of Glassdoor reviews, to be correct. And, hell, okay. One of the things that he's complaining about in here, by the way, which I do disagree with, is the idea that Rome 2 didn't need to be anything more than another Shogun 2, which, again, I heartily disagree with. One of the big issues with Total War is a lack of progress, a lack of making the game actually better. Shogun 2 was accepted for being a return to the roots, because after the failures of Empire and Napoleon, the gamers just wanted a good old-fashioned Total War to return to, rather than another experimental one like Empire, which turned out to be a disaster. Rome 2, well, it was another old-school Total War game. It was a sequel to one of their most successful titles. It did need to innovate in order to draw people back in, because if you don't innovate, you arrive at the point of Pharaoh, where people are looking at all of your mechanics, features that have been in the game for ages, like when they reintroduced the family tree in, what was it, Attila? It's like, new feature, family tree. Hey. So you do need to advance, but right now, that is yet again completely and utterly stopped. The upcoming patch notes for Pharaoh, for example, are ridiculous. Okay, so one of the dumbest ones is that archers will now be able to target units dynamically. What do they mean by this? Well, if a unit is far away, the archers will lob their shots, or if they need to gut over objects, and they'll do less damage because the arrows will fall in a large area because they're lobbing their shots, they're less accurate. If a unit is up close, they will shoot directly at the unit rather than lobbing, thereby doing more damage because more projectiles are hitting the unit. Stop me if you've heard that before, because that's been a basic feature since, I think, Shogun 1. or at the very least, the earliest 3D ones. This isn't a new feature. What other new features are there? Lethality. So weapons will now come with a lethality rating, where a club will have a low lethality rating and an axe will have a higher one, where the lethality rating is a percentage chance to instantly kill the model you are hitting. So if you hit a model, you would normally shave away at its hit points, right? Because each model and the unit in total has X amount of hit points. Now, a model might actually instantly kill an opposing model depending upon the lethality of its weapon. Now, not only does this sound like it would be really annoying and difficult to balance, as you are now adding in an RNG element to large-scale melee combat, but doesn't this also just sound like a return to the old system of 1 or 2 hit points of medieval and prior? It sounds as if the company is just looking back at the past and going, shit, how can we recreate the old systems in our current dumbass engines? You don't. You do not. You burn that piece of shit engine to the ground and you make a new one. That is what people have been saying for goddamn 10 years now. The current Total War engine is not good. It is bad. It is fundamentally flawed and you need to get rid of it. But, well, here's the thing. If these reviews are correct, middle management is largely incompetent, people are leaving in droves, the company's being, cut down, there are no more senior elements or particularly artists around, can they even make a new engine? Or have they now become so fully dependent upon the one they have that even the thought of making a new one is practically impossible? Who knows? Though it seems likely. And the third feature, bigger maps. Oh goody. And hey, don't get me wrong here, I want bigger battle maps. I think I can see so many cool ways to make a bigger battle map a huge change to the way Total War battles are fought. But you need to add in other mechanics other than that, because if all you do is make a larger box, but then the enemy army simply, arrives and sets up position in the middle of the box, the remaining 95% of the map is largely irrelevant because the enemy army is there, and I win the battle by routing the enemy army. See the problem? You've got to add in additional objectives, some reason for the player and the AI to deviate troops away from the main skirmish melee to go do something else. And the only way you can do this, by the way, is through a complete rework of the battle system. You need on-map objectives, you need reasons to take them, although you do need to avoid the awful system from Rome 1 where you just add a random victory point on the map. That obviously doesn't work, and I do have some ideas, but at this point I ain't giving them to Creative Assembly for free, let's put it like that. But you need to completely restructure the way battles are fought if you want a larger map to really be in effect. Though there are so many cool ways you could do this. With the current day true line of sight system, a large map could really actually make skirmishing units more valuable again, fast units. Although again, you need to rework everything. Unit limits? We're still working with 20 units an army. Anywho, we're not going to complain too much about the current state of Total War because that isn't really necessarily the direct point that we are addressing here. The point appears to be that the core rot at the heart of Creative Assembly is its middle management and leadership, which has fossilized into their positions of, well, being unable to achieve what they used to because they don't have the team they once had. A lot of the reason why the previous Total War games became as good as they did was probably because management did throw out the same ideas like in Rome 2. They made, big pushes like, hey, let's do this, let's do combined land and naval battles. Let's do something cool, but they didn't have the programming skills and staff on hand to actually do that, do it quickly enough, and then fix the ensuing bugs quickly enough for release. In other words, management overestimated the capabilities of their programming and people who are actually delivering, because back in Medieval 2 and so on, well, that game 2 was basically finished at the 13th hour. It was not ready for launch, but they hammered it through, they got the bugs fixed, and they managed to release a remarkably solid product, despite it being virtually in a shit state mere months and weeks before. He mentions this in this article as well, that there were many Total War products that had basically been fixed with massive crunch overtime weeks before the product was supposed to be released. And yet with Rome 2, they didn't have that capability to do it anymore. The skill was no longer there at the company. And now with the downsizing. See, the downsizing is absolutely necessary. Creative Assembly at 800 people could not release products of the same quality as Creative Assembly when they made Medieval 2. Obviously, a lot of these people are not worth the salary they are being paid. And considering how much time they wasted on Hyenas as well, which I guarantee you was the brainchild of some progressive twat in middle management, they got a slash like nobody's business. But when they do, well, if, as Julian McKinley says here, and as the reviews say as well, that they didn't actually fire any of the actual studio directors and so on, well shit, that's not going to fix anything. So you're going to have the same overreaching, overly optimistic leadership that doesn't take into account the actual needs and necessities of the guys making the game, making equally massive demands of a much smaller group of people, and a much smaller group of new people as well, as you've already scared away all of the talented ones. And with reviews like these, it might be difficult to get a whole lot of new good people as well. Creative Assembly's death might already have happened. We might just now be sitting here watching the last final twitches of the corpse, as the company itself expired 2 or 3 years ago at this point. Even the enormous financial success of Total War Warhammer can only keep the company going for so long, especially considering that the players have had enough of their abusive DLC policy. And incidentally as well, this is another one of the big problems that is addressed in this lengthy article. He mentions that the leadership was aware that Rome 2 wasn't really in a good state, but they pushed it out the door regardless, knowing that they would take a hit with the fans, but figuring they could ride it off. And you know what? That's because they could. They had before with Empire, and they knew now that, okay, we have this much goodwill. If we push this game out now, we are gonna cut that in half, but we're gonna have enough to survive. We're gonna give them a couple of free DLCs, which were sliced out of the game to begin with anyways, and far too many people will just lap that up. They'll eat it up, just like with Empire and Napoleon. And they will actually thank the company for these crumbs of their table. And this continued on and on and on. And I've called it out time and time again, and I've been criticized for it time and time again, but you get the industry you ask for. In the case of Creative Assembly, they knew they could push out a broken product and you would still buy it, and if they just made a decent game afterwards, all would be forgiven. That's what they did with Total War Rome 2, Warhammer, where they figured, okay, can we charge $60 for an expansion pack? Yes, we can. And thus we had Warhammer 2. Can we do it again? Yes, we can. Warhammer 3. Can we continue to abusively abuse you with our DLC policy? Abusively abuse you. Yes, we can, because you'll keep swallowing that dick for years to come, until finally Shadows of Change was one bit of greed too far. They had overplayed their hand. They had underestimated just how riled up they had made the customer base, and it slammed shut on their necks like a vice. And if that was the only thing that was happening, it probably wouldn't even have that much of an effect. But then Pharaoh flopped too. Much for the same reason. Not enough content, way too high a price. And then Hyenas, which might have cost as much as £100 million, which sounds like a lot to me, but it's not impossible, of course, also flops. And then Sega leadership arrives and start beating them over the head with their losses. Now they've got to slaughter the company. They've got to fire off a whole ton of people, and they've got to somehow rebuild from the ashes without the programmers that made the game good to begin with, without the people who made the impossible possible 10 years ago. Now, I have long said that adversity breeds resilience. And this is one of the biggest problems with Creative Assembly over the last few years that has caused them to be unable to add in new and interesting things to the game. Whenever they ran into a problem with a mechanic, they would simply remove it. Oh, we can't get naval battles to be good instantly. Remove it. We can't get sync kills into Total War without making it too expensive. Get it out of there. We can't fix this. We can't fix agents. Remove. And so on and so on. Creative Assembly adopted the idea that if they couldn't make something work immediately, they would simply remove it from the feature list. This bred weakness. And weakness, eventually, no matter how long it takes, breeds failure. And again, if the date marking on the drama being brought up is any indication of how badly the ship is listing, then I'd say that failure is here right now. We'll see. The next big Total War game is going to be the watermark to see whether or not Creative Assembly has actually managed to raise the ship. Whether or not to right the ship, more precisely. If it is good, then great. But if they announce a big title, like Medieval 3, for example, or the rumoured Star Wars of 40k one, and it flops too, then CA is dead. Guaranteeably. And you know what? Right now, I'm not entirely sure which outcome I'd prefer, as I see advantages in both. Until next time, I've been Arch. Thank you very much for watching, and I do hope to see you all again soon. Till then, have a good day.